Hi, welcome to Centers in the P3 Mathematics Classroom. My name is Melanie Harding. I'm the Math and Science Coordinator here in the Office of K-3 in the Division of Early Childhood Services. Today we're going to be talking about centers. We're going to be talking about managing centers, also just get a common definition for centers. We're going to talk about how to plan and manage them, and we're going to talk a little bit about scaffolding and differentiation, as well as the priority topics that you should be focusing on in your centers. I put up these position papers, and on our website is also this presentation. So I'm presenting it to you in hopes that you'll turnkey this or watch it yourself. But these position papers are really helpful background. The National Council of Supervisors of Math believes that mathematically inclusive classrooms create those equitable and flexible grouping structures. Given the diversity of learners and their needs, students benefit from this differentiated support from their teachers, as well as working within flexible peer groups aligned to those needs. For many students, strengths-based flexible grouping practices can be accomplished within a typical classroom setting. We know that this is imperative. We know we have to have small group instruction, but oftentimes what I hear from teachers, well, what are my students doing? Well, I'm leading those small flexible groups. It's really difficult to keep them engaged and busy in those centers. Well, we know students cannot do seat work or busy work. Those days of I do, we do, you do, in the whole group setting are over. That can be done in a small group in a way, but not in a whole group. So what should they be doing? Well, we know they need to be in differentiated centers or workstations. Math centers or workstations are one and the same. Throughout the presentation, I'm going to refer to them as centers mostly, but I may slip up and say workstations because I do like to call them that because kids are so busy working, creating, being engaged, collaborating. So what are centers? Let's get that common definition. Centers are the actual activities that students do. It's not that fixed place in the classroom. They're always differentiated. They're always standards-based. They're engaging activities, and they foster math thinking. It's never, ever a worksheet. It's meaningful engagement. The goal of centers is really to allow students an opportunity to engage in sustained practice over time to build conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and problem-solving skills. Activities usually start at a concrete level and then scaffold to the pictorial level and the abstract level. Kids can start anywhere on that trajectory or in that cycle of engagement, depending on their developmental process. One of the goals today for me is to help you identify what a good center should be, should look like, and how to have those meaningful, purposeful, engaging practice centers in your classroom. So we know that we have to have purposeful practice, but it needs to be fun, engaging, and hands-on. It's got to be academically rigorous too, standards aligned. Students have to be able to gain confidence and pride in their work. They shouldn't be frustrated in centers. Centers allow children an opportunity to revisit, review, practice, but they can also be enriching. They should be flexible, confident in their problem solving, and they should be proficient mathematicians. So we want them to feel good in these centers. So we really need to be working in their zone of proximal development. This meaningful practice that you're going to create, it could be with their peers, it could be with two, it could be in a group, it could even be individual practice, and that's okay too. But it's never busy work or worksheets. I might say that like 10 more times, but it really cannot be a worksheet. And also, students should never be in a center that they don't understand. The purpose of a center is to allow students an opportunity to practice their skills in their zone of proximal development and make sense of the math they're learning. This isn't easy work. It does take a lot of time. And I know that time is the enemy sometimes in your classrooms. So if you start now and you start small, you'll see that you can probably get this accomplished in a short amount of time, but it does take some planning and some work. I'm going to show you a quick video. In the last district I worked in, we created this video just to show what we were doing in centers.
Math Workshop is organized chaos at its finest. Math Workshop allows for a group of children to learn and work together in a structured instructional format that has multiple spaces for individual, partner, and small group work.
Today, we're going to go back to our seats and we're going to get ready to start our workstations. All right? So I'll clean this up. One, get ready. Two, stand up. Once your leader comes back with your workstation, check what your work is in the basket for the day and get started right away.
Marley, you're the team captain for our problem solving center. So Marley, go get the red basket. And Diego, Zanija, and Cameron, please go over to the table and you can help her get ready. Ava, you're the team captain at our shapes and geometry basket. Please go get the black basket. Maya, you can go over the table and get her ready and help her get everything set up for the centers. Go ahead, Maya.
In Math Workstations, students collaborate and learn about math through invigorating and stimulating projects, games, and activities. Stations are differentiated, standard space, engaging activities that foster mathematical thinking.
So we all have different teams that we all go to our different centers. We have cool kids, silly kids, and we have LOL kids and the heart kids. We all go to different centers. We have rulers that we look to. So if we had number 2 today, we'd look at number 2 and we'd read it and it would say work it out. And then we'd see what day it is. And then after when we were done doing our first rotation, we'd be singing the song. And then we'd go to our second rotation quietly.
And so when we go to our second rotation, which is number 5, so we look for number 5, which is cruising the carpet. If they're at cruising the carpet, we do geo boards, we do the clay, we do the toothpicks. That helps us with new strategies.
The goal of Math Workstations is to encourage students to make sense of math by engaging in sustained practice over time that allows them to build conceptual understanding, procedural fluency, and problem-solving skills.
You know it's a pentagon. I know it's a pentagon. I know it. I just told you before you said it.
Make sure it has 5 sides and 5 corners.
Through a variety of experiences that start at the concrete level and then scaffold through the pictorial level and then the abstract level, children get to feel the math, see the math, and do the math. Math Workstations allow children the opportunity to revisit, review, practice, and be enriched so that they can become flexible, confident, proficient mathematicians. Rigor plus highly engaging activities equals Math Workstations that are successful.
Okay, I'm going to stop it there. Okay. So as you saw in that video, that was a second grade teacher and a kindergarten teacher that I highlighted. So you can see it can be done in any grade level, basically. I was a third grade teacher for a long time. I did it in third grade, but I also taught preschool and K, and I always had centers there as well. It's not hard to manage anywhere you are if you have a good plan in place. So we'll talk more about that too. This is some data from NEAR. They did a study a few years back, and I think it was across maybe 90 districts in 90 classrooms in 20 different districts, many different socioeconomic levels for the families in those districts. So children were from, all over the board. It was where they spent time in classrooms, 4 hours, just observing, minutes spent on different tasks. So as you can see, kindergarten, first, second, and third grade, really 60% of students' time is spent within like transitions and whole group instruction. We know whole group instruction is not the best practice for these kids. No one is benefiting from that. The kids that right in the middle that might be benefiting from it aren't even getting that collaborative time to work with teams and talk about strategies and really go deeper in their thinking. And then a third of the class, it's below what they're doing, and a third of the class, it's above what they're doing. So we're really missing a lot of kids in that whole group instruction. It's really a shame when you look at this because the amount of time spent in small group is very, very small, 5%, 3%, 6%. We have to do better. And I have done observations or just visits to districts, and I see some districts really trying to carve out the time for this now. So it's really exciting to see that. But there's districts that are still at that level where they're like, I'm not sure how to get away from that whole group. My program is written that way, and I'm just not sure. So I'm hoping that I can give you some more tips today to help you move out of that. And also, we're going to be doing part 2 of this training where you'll have some tips from a teacher in kindergarten, actually one that was highlighted in that video. And he's going to share some of his tips and strategies to make this work in his kindergarten classroom. I've showed you this pie chart probably 100 times, anybody who has come to any of my training, but I think it's really important to see what should be happening in a math block. Again, this isn't the state saying you have to do this. This is just based on good research, good practice. We know that this is beneficial for children. Math centers really should be done as part of your regular math block every day. No matter what core resource you're using, students should have the opportunity daily to have purposeful, meaningful, independent practice. And the math block should also be broken up into 3 parts. So outside of that small group and center work, that should be 60% of your block. 10% should be the energizers, routines, problem solving, and mini lesson, 10% for each. And then a debrief at the end. And that mini lesson, really, whole group mini lesson is just introducing a standards aligned topic that you're going to start to break down for children in small groups, whether you go high, you go low. Oh, I shouldn't say that word low. Whether you go higher on the trajectory or lower on the trajectory, you're going to meet kids where they are with that standard. And oftentimes people say, well, what should I be doing in those centers? What should I focus on? I can't give you that answer. Depends sometimes on what your unit of study is. So if you're really working hard in addition and subtraction in first grade, you may have, 4 centers that focus on that. But I just kind of put your big ideas based on our standards. So those priority goals that you really want to hit. So in pre-K, numbers and counting, spatial relations and measurement, geometry, kindergarten. You want to start with counting, but you want to move into numbers and operations. You can even have place value towards the second half of the year or even earlier. Geometry, measurement, data literacy. Same with problem solving. Definitely get that in there. Once you start doing it as a whole group in a quick, mini lesson or routine, kids are going to start to understand how to solve problems with their partners or with their teams and the expectations. I won't read all 3 of them coming up, but first, second, third grade, same thing. Just follow those priority goals or your unit of study. When I was in 3rd grade as a teacher, I always had fractions almost all year round because I got to be honest with you, it's a really difficult concept. And I just did it constantly and spiraled it through everything I was doing. This is something that, again, on our website, I'll have this presentation, but the priority goals for K-3 are here if you want to, whoops, I'm sorry, let me go back. If you want to look at those. And what I like about these, this is shared with me from Dr. Nikki Newton, who does a lot of work with small groups and centers. So it's just a helpful little tool that she shared with me. And I'm sharing with you because, of course, she's a sharer. But it was like a poster but we use them kind of in workstations because all workstations should have a goal and kids should know what they're working on at the time. And these are really all of the priority goals that they're going to be working on in first grade. So you can make it into a poster, you can make these into I can statements for your centers, but it's just a little helpful tool, so you don't have to recreate the wheel. Okay, so setting expectations. Like I said before, a failure to plan is a plan to fail, basically. You need to plan this. So I'm not expecting that, hey, I'm going to get started on centers tomorrow. It's not easy work. It's hard work. But you got to plan for it, or it will be it could be a failure. And you're going to get discouraged because, hey, they're not following the rules. They're not doing what I asked them to do in those centers. They need to be playing those familiar games in centers. No one should go to a center and not know what they're doing. You really need to start off your year with a full year of practice. And when I say that, I don't mean that you take a whole month and you don't teach anything but how to work in a center, but maybe every day for 10 minutes, that whole group mini lesson is about how do we use the rotation chart? Let's practice. Let's read it together. Let's move to a center now. Or like a lesson on perseverance, a lesson on how to work with a partner to play a game, how to use really good math manners. Because we're learning to be really good mathematicians and we need to start to use the tools in our classroom. So all of that has to be taught. So Dr. Nikki actually calls it the first 20 days of math. I kind of adopted that as well. And we started that in my district where I gave them kind of an outline as to what you should be doing daily. And that'll be in part 2 of our training. So if you come on back, you'll have some resources for that as well. I'm going to show you another really quick video, but you can just see how some kids are working alone. Some kids are working in partners, but everybody's working.
I want to play this game. I'm not playing the game.
You have the cards that you're building that you can find this out.
Yeah, but
Math is fun in second grade.
Number counting, challenge our brains.
Always learning, we know facts.
Money measurement, we got that.
Clean up your workstations, let's move on.
We love math, bring it on.
Sound off.
1, 2, 3, 4.
Please take your ruler, check where you go for workstation 2, and go.
I won. Bring up. Where are you? We have.
Okay. So as I said before, there's partnerships, there's teams, there's individual work. You hear the dice going. It's a nice, nice pleasant hum of activity. It's a workstation. It's fun and exciting. And the kids, you could tell that they're feeling good about what they're doing. Another thing you can see is they like to play games. I heard one kid say, I won at the end. No one's mad, no one's upset, but they do enjoy winning. So it should be gamified. It should be engaging and fun. It can't just be worksheets. And sometimes, like you saw Sean in the first video in the kindergarten classroom, they were playing that game Headbands where they had the shape on their head and they had to guess it when their partner was describing the attributes. And then he had a takeaway, like an artifact sheet where they did actually record some of those shapes that they saw and how many vertices, how many sides, things like that. So it's not that you can't have them do a recording sheet at the end and an artifact, but it shouldn't be all about that. I just put this slide up there, even though I know that you're not doing mixed fractions in pre-K to 3. But just to say that practice does not make perfect. Only practice perfect. I'm sorry. Only perfect practice makes perfect. Gotta say that 5 times fast. That's hard. But it's so true because if you practice facts over and over again, or a procedure over and over again, but you're making that same mistake over and over again, and you're doing it independently by yourself in that, I do section of the I do, we do, you do, I'm sorry, you do section. It's not good because now you're practicing that mistake over and over again. And it could become ingrained. And this worksheet I always found as a teacher interesting when we say when we divide fractions, we invert and multiply, invert and multiply, invert and multiply. I can do a whole work page of that. And I know the procedure, but do I really know what it means when I say 6 divided by a half? It's not 3, it's 12. Well, why is it 12? Well, if you invert and multiply, I know it's 12. But when you say 6 divided by a half, you think it's 3. So kids start to not understand these procedures that they're practicing over and over again, or they could just be making mistakes. So just be cautious about that practice and thinking, well, practicing timed facts tests over and over again makes perfect. It doesn't. Like I said before, we need to gamify those centers. This is an example of a game, Double Bump. I think I got this one from Christine Tondevald, but it's just a fun way to practice our facts and gamify it and put strategy behind it, which is always so much fun. I'll talk more about that game in a minute. But you need to try and differentiate within your centers. It's not easy to differentiate all 4 centers off the bat. I always say start with that like numbers and operations center because you can do the same games with different number ranges or different strategies. Like some kids might be working on doubles plus 1. Some kids are doing facts through 20. Just depends. Always have scaffolds in place, but you don't want to over scaffold. So when I say having those scaffolds like tools or in a 10 frame, when my kindergartners might be counting out items, maybe there's pictures of the items in the box that they can cover to show the number 5. But that scaffold has to come away once they master. So you just have to be cautious not to over scaffold. Same with like those shaped puzzles. I always see shaped puzzles and they're great. I love shaped puzzles, but just to make sure that they're not always filled with those lines. Kids might be ready to now move on and put their own different shapes in there, not just the rhombus, not just the triangle. Maybe they're going to start using the trapezoid instead. Make sure that there's a CPA, cycle of instruction, a concrete pictorial abstract or representational abstract. So kids have the opportunity to work with the concrete model before they move on to procedural fluency, and not all kids need it. They might be moving on from that. It's okay, but we really do need to make sure we have it in place. And children should know how to scaffold for one another without giving the answer. And again, that's a small mini lesson. The beginning of the year, we want to challenge one another. That's what good mathematicians do. All right, I'm going to start talking about some types of centers. So this is in the numbers and operations center. Between addition, subtraction, multiplication, division. There's a lot of games that you could play that could go with any of these operations, but always thinking about the concrete, pictorial, and abstract within those centers, make sure that you do have that in place. This is just an example. So when you're creating number sentences for the number 3, 5, 10, whatever it is, having those number bracelets where they can actually show it on the number bracelet. This is just one way to show it concretely. There's thousands of ways. But then having a pictorial representation of that number bracelet after they have showed you many ways, and you might start this in a small group and then bring it down to that pictorial level. And then they could start with the abstract of actually being able to solve facts without the scaffolds. Always have anchor charts available with strategies, with realia, with word walls. They could be at the station, like in folders, in their notebooks, and on the wall. Some of my teachers use QR codes. I never did that personally. I think when I was still in the classroom, I don't know if that was happening, but they would put it on QR codes and the kids could just scan it with their iPads and have it right in front of them. And it would just be an example of how to solve that problem or what the place value actually meant. So just to have these things available for kids. Again, this is just a way to help you to be left alone during your small group. They need to be autonomous. They need to have tools that'll help them to solve these problems on their own. So these generic games or evergreen games, that's something that Christine Tondevald, who is just a math consultant out there, but she really does have some great free tools. So I do try and point you towards people who have, good free tools that are really good teachers of mathematics. You don't want to go down those rabbit holes of teachers pay teachers, and Pinterest could be great if you're following the right person and getting some really good ideas, but just don't spend too much time in there. And when I tell you, like, your core program has so many of these activities and games already embedded, it's just a matter of you pulling them out. You and your team even working together to say, let's kind of pull together as many numbers and operations, activities and games as we can from our core program and bring it to our next PLC, and then talk about how we can even level that. But she has some on her website, Christine Tondevald, and they're called Evergreen Games, and they're free. And there's like hundreds of Blackline Masters. So this is just a couple of examples, but there's memory games, there's dice games, domino games, games that you can play with a plain deck of cards, just a number deck of cards, board games that you could print out and play. And again, it's just about changing the numbers sometimes that you're using. Another game I love that I told you about before is Bump. I saw a classroom, they were practicing, making 10. When they rolled the dice, they had to find a number that made 10, and they just did it on their worksheet and they colored it in. They were doing it by themselves, and they weren't completely bored, but they weren't completely engaged either. And kids were making mistakes, and there was no partner working with them to help them to not make those mistakes. But when you start to cover up a space with your cube, and your partner might want that space, they're going to be paying attention to see if you're right. So this is a make 10 bump down here where they roll the die. If they roll a 2, they can put their cube right here on this circle. And then if their partner rolls a 2, they can bump them off. The goal is to use all 10 of your counters first. Let's say you roll a 2 again, you can put 2 cubes on this, and now you've captured it. So, and that's the name of the game. So of course, partnerships are going to say, well, I'm going to pay attention, but you can do this with so many different types of activities. She has them for fractions and decimals. She has them for shapes, all sorts of different things. Shake and spill. That's something I used to do in my classrooms a lot in kindergarten. You just have a picture of something, like if it's a holiday type or seasonal thing, like the mitten. I would have a big mitten. They shake and spill some two-sided chips. They pour them out. There's some on the mitten, there's some off the mitten, and you start to make number sentences. So there's 3 on the mitten, 2 off the mitten, 3 and 2 is 5. And they can just talk that through with their partner. That could be their concrete activity. If they're ready to move it to a pictorial level, that's great. If they're ready to write that in the abstract way, that's fine too. I Have, Who Has is another great one. We used to do this with time, with money. There's so many concepts you could use this with. So, and again, she's made a lot of them for you, so you don't have to recreate the wheel. And I'm sure you have a lot in your core program. So what does the research say about problem solving? We want to have problem solving centers. We know that. That's not what the research says, but I did do a whole PD about problem solving, and it's on our website. You could watch that or share it. But it talks a lot about the cognitively guided instruction, the hierarchy of types of problems. So children in kindergarten should be solving those 4 types of problems. It doesn't mean that they can't go beyond that. They sure can, but you really do, as a teacher, want to know, well, what should they know in kindergarten? So go to that problem solving PD. If you haven't already. If you don't know about Cognitively Guided Instruction by Carpenter and colleagues, it's a fabulous book that talks about CGI and the hierarchy of problem solving and how to teach it. So we need to teach problem solving a lot. It should be in everything we do every day. So make sure you have lots of tools to solve, a lot of scaffolds in place. Story mats are so much fun. And again, you model this in whole group, you model it in small group. They should be levels. Some kids are going to be able to go higher in those levels of types of problems. And other kids are going to be working at their grade level, and that's okay too. Templates to help them solve. I'll show you a couple of those. Students should be creating their own. Remember, we don't want children to just be decontextualizing a problem. They should put context to it, have them contextualize a problem. So here's some templates that you could use. Definitely use this with my first through third, understand, plan, solve, check. If they weren't writing on this template, they were talking it through as a class, as a partnership. But maybe it's a 5-day plan, maybe it's a 4-day plan. The first day, we're really just going to be reading and understanding with our partner, and then we might share out. How a 10-minute problem solving period could be accomplished. We really just want to read the problem for understanding and start to think about what's the situation? What's it asking me to do? Again, I have a problem solving training you can look at with a lot more information on it. But templates like this to help them plan, solve, check, have them read it, draw it, solve it, read it, build it, solve it, however you want to do it. But sometimes we, in kindergarten, you could read the problem ahead of time before they move to their centers. Everyone knows you could put more pictures in here. There's so many different ways to do problem solving centers. I love story math, and we would do this in small group a lot. So when kids got to their centers, they knew exactly what to do, but they could create their own using blank story maps like the Savannah one or the ocean one, and have like great fun counters like dinosaurs, farm animals, sea creatures, vegetables, fruits. There's so many different counters. I used to buy whatever I could get my hands on. And a lot of teachers would go to the dollar store and buy, donut erasers and apple erasers and just fun erasers to use for counting and for storytelling. Having 10 frames, 20 frames, 5 frames, things like that. Dr. Nikki on Pinterest does have a really great board about problem solving, and she has all of the levels of problem solving there. So there's the level of problem solving and an example with pictures for kids. So you could use something like that. Kids could be having a journal where they do put their work in. This is just a number story mat. So there's lots of different ways to attack it. And remember, we talked about contextualizing problems. Maybe kids shouldn't always be taking that abstract word problem and representing it symbolically and solving it, those typical word problems. When kids are asked to give context to a situation using numbers, symbols, operations, they're contextualizing it. So when you say the answer is 5 rabbits, what's the question? Or the answer is 50, what's the question? The answer is 3 cows, the operation's division. Give me a story. These are kids actually giving context to a number or a situation. So thinking about it that way as well. And fixing the error, kids love to do that. So having some of those in centers where kids work together, and this can be put in their journal. They can act it out, they could draw it, however you like, but just where they find and fix the error, and they usually love that. These are a couple that I found that were something different than I didn't show in our problem solving video, but they're from the Lawrence Hall of Science, and they have so many fun activities there. This one's called Simone's and Brianna's Braids, and it gives you like a PDF. And there's just so many different things you could do with these pictures. They give you activities you could do. But it's just a really fun story mat to say, okay, I want you to make a pattern, talk to your partner about the pattern, have your partner recreate the pattern. Maybe they're doing multiples, maybe they're doing multiple add-ins. But you can do so many different things with them. Brianna has 2 braids, which is really cute too. So just something different. Lawrence Hall of Science does have a lot of cute, fun things that are rigorous and standards aligned at the same time. The 3-bean salad is fun, where you actually, we all have given kids these dry beans. They have all these riddles. This salad contains 2 lima beans, twice as many red beans as lima beans, but there's 10 beans in all. Can you solve it? So the partnerships would work together to solve it, and they have so many different types of salads they can make, which is really cute. This is one with stamps that's really cute. I love Grandpa's coins. We did start to, here at the state level, incorporate coins and counting using coins in our standards. So, please take note of that. But this is just another way to start to identify the coins and their names, because honestly, by 2nd grade, they need to be adding up all of these money amounts. And it's just a fun way to bring them into play. So this pocket contains half as many nickels as pennies. There's 4 dimes in all, 16 coins in all. I mean, we could bring that up to a higher level too, where kids are actually counting how much money they have in Grandpa's pocket. All right, I'm going to move on to place value. But problem solving, there's a lot more information on the website on that last training done about problem solving. Okay, place value is so important. We need kids to understand the structure of the place value system. Kids need ways to understand ways that numbers can be partitioned, and we need to assist them in developing that flexibility with numbers. Students should understand concretely or conceptually through objects, words, and symbols. When teaching place value, you should always start with that concrete understanding. They should build ones, tens, and hundreds. Before they even get to the base 10 blocks, sometimes students have to understand what that long means, what that 10 really means. They might need to build it, like up here with the beans and the craft sticks, to show what a 10 stick actually looks like, and then start solving with that. Always have lots of anchor charts up to model place value, and using just the correct vocabulary when talking about numbers. It's not, a 1 and a 5 makes 15. It's 10 ones, and I'm sorry, 10, 1, 10, 5 ones, or 15 ones. Children need to start using the correct terminology. Sorry. And again, back to those generic evergreen games. Make sure you're bringing that in for place value too. Again, I stole these some of these from Christine Tondevald or Dr. Nikki, but I know that your core program has lots of resources for place value because it is such an important concept. All right, the Geometry Center. Research shows that there's not enough deep geometry learning in the elementary grades. However, there's tons of it in the middle school, and kids just aren't always ready for it. So it's important to, again, use that correct vocabulary when discussing 2 and 3D shapes. Why can't kids say sphere or rectangular prism or vertices or angles? They don't have to say cube. They actually use the correct vocabulary. We never should see things like this down here. There's a picture of food and it kind of goes along with the shape. I just saw this not long ago in a preschool classroom. A piece of pizza is not a triangle. We need to talk about shapes really the way that they should be talked about. We also just don't pigeonhole children into every shape looks exactly the same. We need to talk about squares and how they're actually rectangles and why are they rectangles. We need to use shapes like rectangles, triangles, hexagons in different sizes, different positions. It can't always be the same way. This is just the big ideas for each grade level. Like I showed you before or talked about before, these shape puzzles are awesome. And then here's a nice little takeaway, but also instead of using the triangles, could you use something else here? Could we use a rhombus? Could we use a trapezoid? What could we put in here instead of what they have? Maybe I'm going to put 3 triangles. So kids might need to start off with the scaffolds, but then they can move to the shapes without a scaffold. Like I said before, just making sure you're using shapes of varying sizes. So a pentagon could look like this, but it could also look like this and this. Just making sure that the kids understand that about shapes. We know that they share attributes, and we should talk about that. Data Literacy Center, I think it's so much fun. We can do this a lot in whole group or in morning routines first. But then you can bring it into centers as well, where children are actually organizing, representing, interpreting data, and asking and answering questions about the data. We don't want kids to just be consumers of data. They need to produce data too. They might collect data based on a unit of study in science, or they could create their own based on their interests or even, popular culture. You shouldn't see dittos with graphs or, data that with questions to be answered. It really should be more student created, class created. You could have a question of the day every day, varying the categories and questions and do centers based around that. Measurement, it's just great to have measurement data literacy in our centers, especially when teaching that unit, but it can't just be for that month. So just make sure you weave it throughout. I love putting it in the weekly, like morning routines. They can be estimating weight or length, decide what units could be used or should be used. And when you're measuring in centers or during routines, make sure you have kids measure. I've seen little things like Gallon Man and Peter Liter, and these tools are great to help you understand the amounts of units within another unit. However, it's very abstract. It's not measurement. If you're teaching measurement, kids should be measuring things. So make sure you take out those rulers, tape measures, scales, weigh things, measure capacity. Don't just talk about it. And technology, I used to always tell teachers we should have a technology center and we invested all this money in a technology center, but really our kids are digital natives. They're technologically fluent. There isn't probably going to be a dedicated technology center in your room for any content area, because really tech tools are going to be embedded throughout everything that they do. So try and embed those tech tools and games throughout the centers responsibly. And also, like, back to being a consumer. Kids aren't consumers of technology. They can even produce technology. They could be taking pictures of their work, explaining their thinking, to journal their work and their strategies. There's all sorts of platforms, paid and unpaid, that allow kids to do this. I know we use Seesaw and Google Classroom. I know that's Seesaw is a paid platform. I'm definitely not advertising for that, but I'm just saying there are platforms out there like that. Kids could produce podcasts, videocasts, screencasts, blogs, all sorts of things. But just have them produce knowledge around math using the technology. Spending your math block for 15 minutes where kids are just working on a platform. And again, I'm not knocking any of these. We used a lot of them in the district that I was in, and I felt like it gathered really great data, and it was purposeful practice, but it was independent. It might be better served as homework or for a choice center later. But during math, you really do want a lot of hands-on, minds-on work. And also keep in mind, I'm not going to talk too deeply about AI, but try and incorporate AI. Don't shy away from it. Children are going to start using it at home anyway. So we want to create those equitable opportunities for all children, because there are children that aren't going to have access to it. So shying away from it and taking it away from those children just isn't really fair. So try and incorporate it when you can into your math instruction. I'm not really talking about science centers today necessarily, but I thought these two slides were good just to exemplify what a good center looks like. Because I had an administrator who I walked with. He's like, "Oh my gosh, this is such a great center. I love this." And I'm thinking, it does look really good. And I'm not saying it's not okay to have, but really it's very closed-ended, right? So we're giving them the magnets. We're giving them the worksheet. They just kind of experiment and then they say yes or no. So there is some kind of hands-on and there could be a lot of discussion. So it's not awful. But then you look at this center, what's different here? Kids are actually taking those magnets or maybe walking around the classroom with it. There's all different types of magnets, shapes, sizes, the circles, the wands. They're using magnifying glasses to really look deeply at items that are magnified and are magnetic and are not. It's kind of like a really great exploration, and they can start to gather their thinking on just like a recording sheet that's more open-ended. So just to start to think about what centers should look like, it really does look good sometimes. You're like, okay, this is really engaging, but could it even be better? And sometimes it's less work for you as a teacher to make it better. These recording sheets could be used for almost every content area that you teach. So just having those available for centers is really a great tool. Okay, assessment, we're going to talk a lot more about that in part 2, but I did want to get into it a little bit here because we know that research shows that assessment that's immediate, strategic, intentional feedback does promote student achievement. So that feedback is really important. So in small groups, it's really important to give students that feedback, fix those misconceptions, see where they're feeling good or feeling like, hey, I need a little bit more work, to really assess what you should be doing in those centers. And then when they're in the centers, it's important to assess some of the work that they're doing. You can't assess everything, but you should try and assess the work that's in those priority standards or your unit of study. So have it embedded in the activities that the students are doing. So when they're doing an activity, like Sean was doing that activity with shapes, using the headbands, he now has a takeaway, and he can see if students understand that hexagon actually has these specific characteristics, and they can show it in many different ways. So think about how you can assess in your centers with a takeaway. Sometimes we call them exit slips, but just try not to get too heavily dependent on worksheets that are takeaways, because we don't always need that. Also, before you go to centers, pre-assess using what they did in the prior unit in those centers and small groups, and gather the exit slips, artifacts, journals, math interviews. Have children self-assess, running records, short quizzes. And when you pre-assess, you can kind of determine what you can do in those centers coming up, because now everyone might be out of that 0 through 5 fact band, and maybe now everyone in my first grade classes has moved up to a different number band. So you can kind of change those centers as you go. And this is just basically saying what I said before. Ongoing assessment just has to happen throughout your unit of study. Collect and record that data as often as you can. Oftentimes teachers will say, do we have to do a unit test in K1, 2? I personally don't have the authority to tell you yes or no on that. That's something that you're going to decide as a district. But sometimes I just don't feel the need for it. If you have standards-based report cards and you're doing a lot of standards-based work in small groups and centers, and you can gather that anecdotal information, those checklists, those recording sheets, conferences, interviews, if you have that data, you can easily show how kids are progressing using a standards-based report card. So that's got to be a district decision, but it's really something to think about if you're not doing that. So I'm just going to ask you to just start. Don't start too big if you haven't started yet. If you have already started and you feel like it's going pretty well, start leveling those centers. But start. Start small, start slow, but just start. And like I said before, if you're going to start to level those centers, I would begin with operations. It's usually the easiest one to start with, easiest one to manage. I hope that some of these resources were helpful for you, and I hope you join us for part 2 of differentiated centers. We'll have a special guest, Sean Kelly, who's a master teacher from the Long Branch Public Schools, to share some of his tips of the trade. So come on out and check him out. And please send us any questions. Here is where you can find us on social media. And here is our email address over at the Office of K-3 in the Division of Early Childhood Services. Always looking forward to hearing from teachers and administrators of math. Thanks for joining me.